What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel, and today I'm going to show you how to make a fun Hexagon Entertainment Center for under $100 using only one sheet of plywood. Let's get started. Welcome to the Komar project. This video is sponsored by WorkPro. Let's build a better project together. Alright guys, for this project we're going to be using a single sheet of 3/4 inch birch plywood, and to make it easier to work with, I grabbed my track saw and cut it down the middle. This was actually my second attempt at breaking down this sheet. First, I tried ripping it down lengthwise on my table saw, but you can see that there's a lathe back there, and I struggled a bit trying to get that full sheet up over it to keep it straight against the fence. So the track saw just made sense for me at this point. Okay, now that I have two smaller pieces of plywood, I can take them back to the table saw and finish ripping them down to 12 inches wide. This is going to give me the depth of the console, and you can make this any size you want. If you want this entertainment center to be a little bit deeper, just make these cuts a bit wider. Then I pulled out my WorkPro workbench and set it up so that I can start stacking all the pieces on top of it. Not only is it height adjustable, but you can use it as a miter station, a scaffold, a dolly, and it even has a built-in power strip that allows you to plug in up to 3 different tools at the same time. But now I still had one full-length piece that I need to cut down. So after marking it down the middle, I cut it down over at the miter saw. Alright guys, so I got all of my plywood ripped down to the dimension that's going to give me the depth of our entertainment center, and I'm ready to start putting in the miters on individual pieces that are going to make up the honeycomb pattern. But before I do that, I actually want to edge band the front side of it while these boards are longer. It's easier to do it now because you can just take this edge banding and apply it across the whole front side of one panel and then rip your miters, and the edge banding is going to be perfect when they come together. So let's get to work. To apply this banding, I first rolled it out to the length of my board and cut it using a utility knife. And since this banding has a glue backing, we're going to need to apply heat to it. And the best way of doing that is just with a regular iron from your laundry room. But just make sure you turn off that steam function, because we're not steaming any wood here, we're just heating it up. I first start with one end, applying even pressure with my iron and slowly working my way down the board. Then to help the banding get a good bond, I took a scrap block of plywood and pressed it down firmly. This way I know that it's bonded and won't come up in certain areas. To cut off the excess of the banding, I picked up this funky looking edge trimmer with a dual blade on it so you can trim in both directions. Then you can take those 2 little notches on it and place them over the edge banding and squeeze. Then you can pull or push it along your board, and it's going to trim any of that overhanging banding, giving you a perfect edge. But the best thing about this is making those little satisfying curlies. Kind of reminds me of noodles and makes me a bit hungry. Then with a utility knife, I cut the end off and run a scrap piece on the edges. This just breaks down the sharp corners a little bit. Using a digital protractor, I set my table saw blade to 30 degrees, set my fence to 10 inches, and started ripping a miter on one side. Then after I had all the pieces ripped on one side, I set my fence to 9 3/4, and placing the original mitered corner against my fence, I ripped the opposing side. You're probably wondering why I didn't actually make both of the miter cuts at the same time, and that has to do with that first board having a square edge up against the fence. When you actually turn it, you're cutting it directly on that edge there, and sometimes you can get some chip out. So I like to leave a little bit more meat on the board so that when you do make that second miter cut, you're cutting through the board and not directly on that edge of it. Alright guys, so we got all of our panels, all 36 of them, cut and ready to go for the glue up. But before we actually jump into the glue up, I want to sand all the insides of all of these panels, because If we were to do this once everything is glued up, we'd have a hard time making sure that these edges stay nice and clean. And to help with that also, we're gonna be using some painter's tape to just line the inside of all of them. So if there is any glue squeeze out, we're gonna catch it on this tape and we can pull it right off. So let's do it. After getting all my panels sanded up to 220 grit, I grabbed some ratchet straps and painter's tape and started laying out the panels, making sure that the mitered edges line up perfectly with each other. It's very important to make sure that they actually touch each other, because if there's any gapping, it's going to show up in the final product. Then I placed painter's tape on each junction and also ran 3 rows of tape across all of them. I did a couple of test glue ups before this and found out that if you only have tape on the junctions, the tape doesn't hold as well and has a tendency to pop off sometimes. So adding those additional 3 rows of tape just makes gluing this thing up a little bit easier. To glue the pieces together, I'm using regular wood glue, which is plenty strong for this if your miters are cut right and come together nicely. After I had glue on all the miters, I can start lifting this thing up into a hexagon shape, and it actually comes together very nicely. I was surprised how easy it was, and that painter's tape is pretty much all that you really need. But since I had some ratchet straps laying around, I decided I'm gonna put those on just to make sure everything stays nice and tight overnight. The next day, I removed the straps and the tape and realized that I had a small gap on one of the corners on each of the hexagons. This is the last connection on the panels that I put together. So to fix it, I put a little quick set glue and then sanded the sides. The glue mixes with the dust from sanding and creates a perfect wood filler to the point where you can't even tell where it was. All right, so I'm ready to glue this thing up, and it's looking cool. I like it. All right, gluing this thing up is pretty straightforward. I just applied glue to the sides that will touch and clamp them together. At first, I tried doing this with the hexagons standing up, but aligning them was getting a little tricky. They were sliding around a bit. So I laid what I had already assembled on the bench and added all the other pieces that way. This was a way better way of assembling it. All right, so we're almost done with this thing, and I even made a couple of shelves that will go hang next to the TV. But before I actually start sanding this thing down, I wanna make some additional shelving for this so that you can put a plant on it or your TV receiver or what have you. And I wanna do that before I start sanding so that once everything's in, I sand everything flush and we're good for finish. After getting my measurements for the inside of the hexagons from corner to corner, I ripped the shelf set to the same 30-degree angle as before, except this time I flipped the piece over and cut it so that the miters come to a triangle point and can be slid into any of those hexagons. Next, I wanted to make sure I had no visible gaps where I had glued the pieces together. So I used the same technique as before of gluing and then sanding over it, making a matching wood putty. All right, it's finishing time, and I'm using Hexagon Clear, a water-based varnish that's not going to yellow my plywood like an oil-based finish. I wanted this piece to stay as natural as possible, but I would still want it to have a good amount of protection because I know that our cat is gonna think that I made this for her, and she's gonna be using it for her personal jungle gym. So this is gonna give me a durable finish with really clear results. Oh, and I forgot to mention that after I put this thing together, I really liked how the plywood edging was exposed, how you could see all those lines. So that's gonna be my front. I'm gonna leave that up in the front, and then the edge banded stuff is gonna be on the back. But I wanted to leave the edge banding portion in this video, so in case you guys want a nice finished edge, you kind of know how to do it. But for me, I really like that exposed look, so I'm going with it. And for those 3 shelves, I wanted to hang them from my ceiling so that I can apply finish on both sides at the same time. That way I don't have to wait for finish to dry so I can do the other side, and I can get this thing done much quicker and get it up the stairs and into our bedroom. Alright guys, and while I get it into place, let's break out the cost of this build. We used 1 sheet of plywood, which cost me $75, and if you're going to be using the edge banding, a small roll you can get on Amazon for 15 bucks. And also, you're going to need a bottle of glue, which you can get for about 5 bucks depending on where you buy it, for a total of $95. All right guys, so there you go. We got ourselves an entertainment center, but this can be used pretty much for anything. If you want this as a bookshelf in your bedroom, you can totally use that. These shelves do come out so you can have them in any orientation. And if you're looking to build one of these, there's a free set of plans over on comarproject.com, or you can click the link in the description below. Thank you to WorkPro for supporting what I do, and of course you guys. Your support means the world to me, and I'll see you guys next time.